Well, let's speak more on this with Natia Seskuria, who is an associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. Natia, thank you so much for joining us on the program. So we've been speaking about how Kyiv
Good evening.
says, good evening. Kyiv says it's ready to move forward with this revised plan now. The latest version, it says, is significantly better than the original US proposal that was put forward last week. We still don't know what the new terms are, but what do you envision the changes to be?
Well, there has been indeed a lot going on around these negotiations. And firstly, we've seen the Russia-US 28-point plan, which was extremely problematic from Ukraine's point of view. And now we see certain shift from Russia-US to US-Ukraine slash European deal. There is certainly the latest developments are certainly positive because it signals that with European involvement, the US president, the US side is somewhat agreeable to negotiate this plan further. And we suspect that there won't be a deal for President Zelensky, which is either take it or leave it and lose the American support, which is certainly positive. But there is a lot to be discussed, and I'm certainly very skeptical to what extent there can be any tangible process when it comes to achieving any outcome, because I do think that the 19-point peace plan, which is much more realistic, is something that Russia would not agree.
Well, the news agency AFP is reporting that the revised plan does provide for Ukraine to keep 800,000 troops like the army it has right now. That's up from the 600,000 limits that had been put in that first draft. What kind of precedent does it set when you have a term stipulating how many troops a country can have to defend itself?
Well, I think firstly, this was one of the key points in the original 28-point plan, and this sets a very problematic precedent when one country, and in this case the aggressor, can set the boundaries to a sovereign country when it comes to the numbers of their army. And Ukraine is in a very and will be in a very vulnerable position, which would involve that they certainly need to be ready for the renewed Russian aggression. So this was something that was argued immediately and dismissed immediately by the Ukrainians, and rightly so. And I do think that Russia should not be given any leverage when it comes to Ukraine's defense and how the Ukraine will organize and manage the issues in relationship to their army and the defense of their country.
Well, President Volodymyr Zelensky says that the talks should include European allies who have largely been left out of this process. Do you think they'll be welcomed at the table?
Well, unfortunately we saw that Europe was very much sidelined from the initial plan. The 28-point plan came as a shocking development. But what we've seen so far is that European leaders have been coordinating with each other quite closely and quite swiftly. And from previous experiences as well, we can tell that Europeans are somewhat adjusted to the manner of working with the current US administration. And in this case, I think we see that Europeans are somewhat succeeding in terms of convincing and persuading Donald Trump to have further discussions on this plan, which is a success from European point of view. But there is a lot more needed, because ultimately this is not just about Ukraine's security and establishing peace in Ukraine, but also about European security, which has been numerously undermined by Russia.
Well, European leaders are being urged to hash out this framework for a so-called reassurance force that would be deployed into Ukraine in the eventuality that the war does end. How is Russia likely to react to that?
I think it is unlikely that Russia would accept any presence of the European forces on Ukraine's soil. And this is why I'm very skeptical about this peace deal. And I don't have high hopes that there will be, unfortunately, any tangible successes when it comes to brokering a deal. And ultimately, I think we should take into consideration the fact that Russia's main goal is to keep Ukraine vulnerable. So this is the end game of Putin, to be able to go back to its initial plan in case there will be some sort of peace deal signed right now. And I certainly don't think that Putin's appetite would be fulfilled by even if the 28-point plan will be achieved theoretically. I think his ambitions are much bigger, and this is the reason why we see that there are conditions and demands coming from Russia, which involves leaving Ukraine without any tangible protection and defense when it comes to future Russian aggression.
Well, Zelensky has signaled that he wants to meet with Trump to discuss those sensitive points that are still in the plan. With the momentum that's now building up now, how do you think that meeting will go?
It's extremely important that this meeting takes place soon, given that Trump is seemingly rushing to get this deal done. And in this case, I think Zelensky has a very difficult task. And in a way, Ukrainians have already gained experience dealing with Trump administration, but Trump is extremely unpredictable and he seems to change sides quite often. This is an opportunity for President Zelensky to explain Ukraine's point of view. And in a way, the positive side is that it is not a done deal. And we should expect that there will be rounds of negotiations, and this process is unlikely to come to its conclusion anytime soon.
Natia, great to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us on Prime News Paris today. Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you.